Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this presentation on electronic supply chain, Adapt or Be Left Behind, presented by Lytica. Quick reminder, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during this presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Now, in 2025, the electronic supply chain faces unprecedented disruption and transformation. Rapidly evolving geopolitical dynamics, inflationary pressures, and shifting market demands are challenging even the most seasoned procurement professionals. The question is no longer whether change is coming, but whether your organization is ready to adapt or risk being left behind. So today, we're going to share strategies to mitigate risks, optimize supplier relationships, and transform volatility into opportunity. You will learn how to refine your procurement strategy and strengthen your supply chain resilience for the year ahead. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Ken Bradley is Chairman, Chief Strategy Officer, and co-founder of Lytica. Ken advocates for the advantages of digital transformation to guide organizations through the dynamic procurement landscape. And he highlights how digital transformation simplifies focus and mitigates risk by using analytics and data such as component pricing, competitiveness, and consumer trends. Vincent Saillard is Chief Procurement Officer at Flex, helping brands to design, source, build, deliver, and manage products that improve the world. He manages a network of more than 16,000 suppliers, covering direct and indirect procurement, freight, logistics, and mechanical and electrical commodities. In addition, he oversees supply chain analytics, supplier quality and compliance management, and supply chain sustainability initiatives while driving operational facilities. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Ken. Ken Bradley, please take it away.
Yeah, so I'd like to start by talking about the problem and where it all started. And to me, the problem is basically one that, as a procurement person, I never knew what to pay for a component. I entered procurement late in my career as Chief Procurement Officer for Nortel Networks, and my career had been really based on semiconductor technology development. I started as an electrical engineer, moved up through the engineering ranks through engineering management, director of technology at Bell Northern Research, managed semiconductor factories for Nortel as general manager and vice president, negotiated joint ventures in China, a wafer fabrication foundry and fabless IC company. And after all that work in semiconductors, I was made chief procurement officer primarily because the CEO of Nortel at the time was really concerned about the way suppliers were being introduced to Nortel. And so I went into procurement with a mindset of supply-based design and the processes that actually led to the results that the company was getting. And what I noticed in that role is that I really didn't know what I should be paying for components. I had 1,600 people around the world telling me that I had the best pricing in the world. I had everybody, suppliers, manufacturers coming in and telling me, Ken, you've got the best pricing of anybody. And then I'd send a circuit card out to a company like Flextronics, and I would get back a costed bill of materials. And on that bill of materials would be a component that I was told yesterday I had the best price in the world, and Flextronics had a lower price for that component. So after I retired and founded Lytica, I got to see what a number of companies were actually paying for components. And I thought it would be interesting if I could come up with some mechanism by which I could figure out what a companies should be paying and actually help them to become much more competitive. So we've been going through a very difficult time the last years. After COVID, we ran into shortages. Coming out of shortages, we got into situations where everybody had too much inventory and everybody was working hard with their heads down. And now we're moving into a time of tremendous uncertainty. And it's time for procurement professionals to raise their heads up and really figure out what's going on and see how they can actually be agile enough to be successful in this very dynamic and uncertain marketplace. one thing that becomes critically important because things are changing so fast is that they be agile. And in the case of electronic components, the industry is just moving so fast. The environment we're working in is so fast that if you're not moving at a fast pace, you're not going to be in a good position to succeed. Now, Lytica is based on a premise that we can take a look at pricing and we can do price predictions. And we base that on real customer data that we get from our customers. Approximately 100 customers are actually giving their pricing information. And what we found is very interesting, and that is that it's not always the biggest guys that get the best results. It's really those customers that have spent a lot of time designing their supply base well and putting in place good business practices that support excellence in procurement. And what we've also noticed is that those companies that get the best results from a pricing perspective are also the ones that seem to be able to get components when the supply is constrained. So the excellence in their business practices and the rigor of their supply-based design has really positioned them to be in the best position to succeed. And so what I'm hoping today is that we can have a good discussion. I'm really interested in hearing from Vincent. As Chief Procurement of Flex, he's right at the coalface, if you like, on a day-to-day basis. He's seeing all the issues that are happening globally in procurement. So I'm looking forward to learning from Vincent. And I'm also looking forward to the questions that I get from the audience, because that will tell me where your issues are and where your insights are. So we'd like to be discussing the vulnerabilities that the industry has, the impact of tariffs, the impact of a number of changes that are happening around us, and see if we can't come up with some insights that actually help us get the whole industry moving in a direction that is positive for both the manufacturers, the suppliers, and the consumers of electronic components. So with that, I'd like to move forward to the panel discussion, if that's okay with you, Bob, to take over.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ken, and welcome Vincent as well. I have the privilege now of asking these two experts a number of questions. And while I'm doing that, don't forget that we'll have an opportunity for the audience to pose their questions at the end of the show too. So once again, as we are having this discussion, please feel free, and we encourage you to submit your questions by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Let me start with a question for Vincent. What are the most significant macroeconomic and geopolitical forces that are reshaping the electronic supply chain in 2025? And how can procurement leaders proactively address these challenges?
All right, you give me an hour to comment on that, please, Bob.
Go right ahead.
I
All the time in the world, as long as it's 100 words or less.
And before I address the question first, thank you, Ken, for organizing this event. And now that you're retired, you keep adding even more value than I guess when you were in your CPO role.
I try.
So on the topic of what are the main forces, and then we'll see what can we do about it. But the main forces that are shaping the industry, I feel, and I've done that for 35 years. Every year we come up with, this is going to be a big year. This is going to be the major disruption. And guess what? I think that again for 2025. So it's not the first time I say it, but I definitely believe it. By the way, when you survey a lot of my peers, I think geopolitical tensions comes up first on the list of potential disruptions. So let me just start maybe with the geopolitical side. And all the people on the call are, you're watching the news every single day. You know all the tensions between America, some of our allies, China for sure. You track the announcements on tariffs that come on a daily basis. So whether they're already implemented, whether they're proposed, whether they're paused till beginning of March, whether they're on the agenda, and we know the administration is working on it, there's more tariff coming our way than we've seen in a long time. And by the way, it's not the first time we're dealing with tariffs. So a lot of companies have been dealing with this for many, many years, not just in America, but also in the rest of the world. So you've seen the 25% on Mexico. You've heard about the 25% on Canada and 10% on the energy, both of those being pushed by a month. You've seen the 10% Chinese products. We heard about a few days ago on the steel and aluminum tariffs. We know that there's reciprocal tariffs being on the agenda. We know that there's European specific things on the agenda. I'm not here to speculate, but more disruptions, because all of those things definitely impact sourcing decisions on where to buy your products and your services. On the other side of the fence, you have retaliations. On the semiconductor side of things, I would really highlight the rare earth minerals. I would really highlight the materials that have been put on export control by China. Indium, molybdenum, bismuth, tungsten, tellurium, and many others. All of those products are actually used in the electronics processes. So far away from our eyes, we don't really, I have to read my notes to remember what those materials are, but they're actively used in a lot of the semiconductor processes. They're ending up, even including on soldering paste in the case of bismuth as an example. So a lot of disruptions that are coming our way, and we need to understand that. On top of that, you've got all the logistics disruptions, not to be forgotten, but the wars, the threats, the issues in the strikes, all those trade disruptions coming every single day. That's on the geopolitical side. On the macroeconomic side, and I don't want to go into a negative picture, but there's still high inflation. We're talking about 3% in the US. There's still relatively high interest rates. What is it, 4.25 to 4.5%, I believe, at the moment in North America. We've had much higher rates years and years ago, but we got used to lower rates in the last few years. So there's a lot of uncertainties. And I would say there's from an electronic standpoint, I see it as a tale of two extremes. On one side, you've got everything that's AI related, and I could add a few more applications to it for sure. And on the other side, the overall semiconductor, the overall industrial activities, automotive may be falling in this camp at the moment. So depending on who you talk to, it's a really good story or it's a really bad story. Those are the big things I see on the macroeconomic and the geopolitical side. On the positive side, there's a lot of technology innovations. So let's not get into a negative perception on things. We all hear about AI, not just as manufacturing AI solutions, data centers, and so on, but the impact it has in the industry is major. So as a chief procurement officer, we definitely need to understand all those positive or negative disruptions and take the best out of it. And if I can just now very quickly, and we'll go probably through other questions into the details of that, but what does that mean? What should we do as practitioners for this? I would make a simple list. One, make sure we stay informed. Check every single day what's happening. Don't overreact to every single announcement that's being made, but stay informed and communicate that information, adding value, adding insights to all your internal and external customers. Build a system where you can easily simulate all those things. What happens if this and this event take place? But don't do it on a case-by-case basis. Do it overall. Build a database where you know quickly, oh, there's a new 25% on something happening. Poof, press the button, get the answer, simulate what it could be. Increase, and I think Ken is helping us in many ways with Lytica on that. Increase the visibility of your supply chain. Understand how you fit versus everybody else. Do a lot of benchmarking, but go deeper into your supply chain. Double down, and I know it sounds kind of easy to say, but double down on localization, on diversification, on multi-sourcing, especially for electronic components. That's the best way to protect yourself when something happens with one of your partners. And go deeper and deeper in your supplier relationships. Build strategic partnerships so that you can react to those macroeconomic, those geopolitical challenges with partners that you can trust. And trust is not something you declare, it's something you built over time. So those are the key things I would say CPOs need to do.
Okay.
So Vincent, I like what you say a lot. From my perspective, I agree with everything you've said. To me, there seems to be a lack of global leadership. Like nobody is actually standing up with a compelling story that says this is where we should be heading. That to me is a concern. With that, there's uncertainty about almost everything. You know, we've got tariffs. Are they going to be on? Are they not going to be on? How big are they going to be? How long are they going to last? You've got chaos in the US. Every time I turn on the news screen now, there's something completely out of the blue is happening that we have no idea how to factor that in. And what bothers me most is all the unintended consequences of all of these actions that are taking place without a lot of really solid forethought that is making the chaos problem even worse. So the thing that really bothers me when I see most of my customers is that everybody knows who they're buying from, they know who the suppliers are, but they really lack that visibility back through the supply chain that gets them down to the raw materials that actually go into that next generation of GPU or that next generation of FPGA or even that next feature of a better capacitor. And so this lack of visibility is a real issue. So from my perspective, if I was in a chief procurement officer role or a strategic sourcing manager's role, I would actually go back to basics. I would say, where do I really understand my company's strengths and vulnerabilities? And you know, I would really take a look at things like you know, what's happened in the past when we've had uncertainty? Can I learn from history? Do I really understand you know, as much as I can about, have I chosen the right suppliers? Are my preferred suppliers really the preferred ones that I need? Or did I just pick them 10 years ago for some reason and you know their strategic value has been lost? Am I dealing with companies where I matter to them? Because if I don't matter to them, they're not going to listen to me if I say I need a better price or if I need more supply. They're going to just say, get in line, you know, this is your price. Whereas if it's somebody that I can really resonate with and we can build a future together, they're liable to give me priority over somebody else. So having that real understanding of your supply base and the processes you're using to deal with your supply base are really important. And those processes lead to things like strategic relationships, you know, preferred partnerships, saying thank you when somebody's done something for you. I mean, believe me, little things matter in your business processes. And, you know, I've dealt with Flex for many, many years, great company. You guys know how to manage things properly. So very pleased you're here, Vincent. Love what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Interesting how the picture gets fuzzier and fuzzier as you move up the tiers, tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the way back to the mine or the farm, raw materials. So you guys have framed the problem really beautifully there, as well as already giving us some advice on how to approach it. But Ken, at the beginning in your presentation today, you talked very much about the problem of cost and price. Like, did I get the best price? Oh my goodness, no, I didn't, even though I thought I did. All of which, of course, is got to be front and center for procurement. But at a time of supplier consolidation, the geopolitical tensions we've talked about that are impacting sourcing strategies, how should companies balance supplier diversification with maintaining cost efficiency and quality?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is, you know, only diversify what needs diversifying. And this comes down to, do you really understand your supply base? Do you really understand how you're interacting with suppliers? And have you really made the right choices? And if you haven't, you have to look at how the environment is changing around you. And, you know, to what degree do I really need to localize? To what degree do I really need to, you know, strengthen my relationship with a supplier that I might have been ignoring more than I should because they become more important to me? And you know, so really understand how you're working. Again, it's back to basics. Understand your strengths, understand the value you're supplying to your suppliers, so that you can leverage that to get them to want to work with you to help you through this difficult engagement. Take a look at where you're vulnerable with not enough alternative sources. If you can get alternative sources, then you know, it may be time to bring on a few new companies that can actually help you. You really also need to understand, where are the supply chains of these companies set up? Like, how many times does product cross a border that's a tariffed border? How many times, like if you take a look at, I read something the other day about the agricultural industry that something that you would think would be simple is like raise a cow and turn it into meat. The cows are born in Texas. They're shipped up to Calgary to be fattened up. They're then shipped back to, somewhere in Minnesota to a slaughterhouse. And so things are crossing the border too many times. And if somebody's taking a percentage on that every time, you need to make sure you're dealing with a situation that does not have a lot of tariffed border transactions taking place. So work with your suppliers to find out if you're building something outside of the US, how do I get all my materials that are outside the US, and what are the suppliers I should be dealing with so that I don't have the tariff impact from that? If you're dealing inside the US, how do you localize and use US manufacturers? So again, you're not paying tariffs. You may be paying tariff on a raw material they've imported, but you're not paying a tariff on the finished goods. Well, I think it really comes down to this understanding of your supply chain, creating alternatives, and working to design something that keeps you very agile, but at the same time, you understand how your material is flowing into you. And again, only diversify what needs to be diversified.
And great messages. I would just add one thing to this. Be very systematic in mapping the capabilities of your suppliers. Because we kind of oversimplify, do I have a supplier who can ship that product? Yes, no. Is it on the bottom? Yes, no. But understanding exactly what are the capabilities of your suppliers is a whole new game. And I think that's something where all the people who are practitioners need to lift the game and documenting those capabilities.
Yeah, on that as well, Vincent, I think suppliers are a great source of information because they know where their material is coming from. And sit down with them and say, look, we have a joint problem here, because if I can't sell my products because I can't get something, you can't sell yours either because I'm your channel to market. And so, basically tell me what's going on with your supply chain. Where do I have vulnerabilities in your supply chain that I need to be worried about, and cooperate with them and work on it together. And so that's something that can't be overlooked. I mean, really work with your suppliers to help you with your diversification.
Interesting that these days single sourcing strategies are really taking a hit as something to completely avoid, but you guys are bringing a lot more nuance to the conversation. Whereas that might be a good idea to diversify sometimes and maybe not in other times. You really got to take a look at your individual supply chain. So thank you very much for that great insight.
Yeah, Bob,
Vince, go ahead.
It is possible to multi-source and single source at the same time. For example,
whoa, wait a minute.
let's say you're buying
Explain.
capacitors. Let's say you're buying something like capacitors.
Uh-huh.
Hey, you may have, I don't know, something like Flex, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of capacitors. I don't know what the number is. But there's nothing that says that you couldn't give $50 million to one capacitor manufacturer, $50 million to another, and $50 million to a third. Be qualified by all three, but you're only buying one type from one guy, another type from another guy, and another type from another guy, such that if there was a failure, these other guys are still incented because of your $50 million worth of business to be able to supply what they're already qualified on. So you've got opportunities to look at allocation strategy as well as just who you're sourcing from in order to keep many companies happy with you and be able to have some flexibility in how you pull on the demand when something changes that's unexpected.
So it's not like you're knocking on their door in a crisis saying, hey, remember me, you're my B supplier. I haven't been buying anything from you before, but I desperately need to now. You're not necessarily going to get the attention that you would expect.
Don't ignore anybody.
Right. That's great. Vincent, tell me about some specific data points or analytics that procurement teams should actually be prioritizing with the intent of improving decision-making and anticipating disruptions in 2025. Maybe share some examples of success actually using these approaches.
That's a good question. So let me first say, in terms of data sets, and I will oversimplify it, but in a way, you've got a lot of data, a lot of analytics at supplier performance level. So all the metrics in terms of on-time delivery, quality scores, you name it. That's the first one. The second one is really all the things that relate to inventory management, inventory levels, lead time, you name it. Third area of data, I would say, is everything that deals with cost and spend analysis to really understand where you're spending your money and at what cost. And last but not least, something that's probably a little bit overlooked, has been overlooked for years and years, is all the risk factors that are impacting your supply chain. The geopolitical risk assessment, the supplier risk, the financial assessments, and that you can use internal tool or external tool. So those in my mind are the four things: supplier performance, inventory, cost, and risk. And to answer your question on some of the specific things we've been doing at Flex, without naming the exact products that we use, because they're all internal products with our own IP. But I would say on the cost one, for instance, and we use a lot of inputs from Ken's capabilities for that. Make sure that you build something that allows you to answer the question that Ken was saying: Am I buying at the right price? Am I going better than the market or worse than the market? And when we were just every single year prices going down, you kind of get used to a specific pattern. We've seen over the last few years huge fluctuations. Are you doing better or worse than your competitors? Are you competitive in the market? We've built things on what we call material competitiveness engines, where we absorb a lot of data, internal data and external data, and try to plot the different pricing points on your on those components to understand if you're the very competitive one or if you're the one lagging. So that's one thing that we've been using, developing using machine learning and putting a lot of AI into it over the years. Second thing is, don't waste what happened over the last few years with all the disruptions. We've been dealing at any point in time with anywhere between 1,000 to 10,000 shortages at Flex level. Shortages meaning, you know, I am not getting the parts I need for whatever reason, either a demand issue or a supply issue. We have a knowledge, we have a database that's massive, where we learned that this product has been a recurring issue over the last few years. This product has alternatives. This product doesn't. This product, the suppliers always find a way to fix it, and so on. There's a knowledge database that is really valuable. So we extract as one specific application. We built all that knowledge into in a database, and we analyze new bills of materials or existing running bills of materials to make recommendations, not just to look at it the way it is today, but say, well, based on our experience, here are the heat points, here's the things that work well, here are the things by history that we've been struggling with, and here are the recommendations on how to mitigate the risk. So that's a second example. Last example I will give you, and this is something that is red hot at the moment, is we have developed tools that allow us to simulate if you want your production to be in this site versus that site, this country versus that country. What are the implications in terms of cost of materials? What are the implications in terms of your footprint? What are the implications in terms of freight, in terms of automation level, in terms of tariff? That's why I'm saying it's red hot at the moment. You can easily simulate, if I'm moving my production, my factory from this site to that site, here are the consequences. But again, you need to really integrate a lot of data points to be able to do that in a easy, systematic manner.
Mm. Well, you're talking about maybe running certain so-called what-if scenarios. What is the underlying technology that makes that possible? Is it AI-driven analytics? Is it this idea of the digital twin, which provides a virtual model of your supply chain that you can then run those scenarios through? What makes that possible?
I would say it's a combination of both. Some of it is AI. And by the way, I'm not one of the persons who's always answering everything with AI. AI is going to do everything. I would say on a more general standpoint, it's more analytics, and AI is a piece of it in my mind that allows you to go much deeper, much faster, efficient way. So yes, it's moving from descriptive to prescriptive and descriptive and predictive and even prescriptive analytics, and we have applications for that. It's building systems that allow you to manage your risk and make sure that you do decision-based risk management, not just looking at the problems and communicating the challenges. It's tools that are on the analytics side, as I just explained, for the competitiveness engines, things that allow you to do a better cost optimization. And on the production standpoint, it's things that allow you to do quality control in a more efficient way. So those are all analytics in some way, AI powered in most cases, but it doesn't have to be. On the second piece, yes, it's also do a lot of simulation. So what you mentioned is digital twins. We have a lot of different applications for that, whether it's planning simulations, demand forecasting, inventory optimization, real-time monitoring of what's happening on the shop floor in your factories, systems that allow you to do continuous improvement on your processes, things that allow you to do predictive maintenance. So long answer to your good question, Bob. It's really a mix of analytics, simulation, digital twin solutions. Those are the tools that we're using in the background.
Again, Ken, you talked earlier about this idea of not really knowing what the lowest price for a component is until it's too late, or thinking you knew, then finding out otherwise. This is technology we're talking about today. AI-driven analytics and like making it possible to understand that and get better insight into that than you ever had before.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the whole premise for me starting the whole SupplyLens platform of products, was to actually allow companies to benchmark how they are and compare themselves to industry, as opposed to compare themselves to what they thought they were doing. Because, you know, often companies think they're doing well because they got X% cost reduction year over year on a certain product. But if when they sourced that product originally, they were paying too high a price, you know, let's say some designer has done a 5-to-1 integration of FPGAs into one. And, you know, just for numbers, let's say that each FPGA was $20 and they went from $100 down to 20, and the designer said, yeah, I'll accept that price, and they didn't get purchasing involved. Well, they're measuring their cost performance from a $20 part year after year in terms of how that price is going down. But if the industry value of that part for them would have been, say, $12 rather than 20, and if purchasing had been involved, they could have been getting cost reduction from $12 down, instead of thinking they're doing well from a base that's too high. So benchmarking becomes really important to the whole process, which is why once I started to realize that I had visibility into what a lot of companies were paying for components, we came up with the algorithms and the methods to actually let us have models of pricing on every component, so that we could actually benchmark you and say, you're at this ranking in the marketplace, and the price for that part at your ranking is this many dollars. And if you're paying, you know, 2 times that, then go back and renegotiate. And, you know, companies, you know, most of the time get what we predict. And if they don't, then we need to look at why don't they? And, you know, what in their supply-based design got them to a point where they can't move from that price? Or, you know, what are they doing practically? Are they having too inexperienced a person actually work in the negotiation? Are they not prepared for the negotiations? Do they not know how to create leverage? So all of these things matter. So we're actually interested in how companies have designed their supply base, the business processes they use, and the results they get. And we start with the results by benchmarking them on price and on a number of factors. Now, what this has done is it's given us a huge database. I'd like to actually compare the size of my database with yours, Vincent. It's not any kind of mail thing. It's just, you got a lot of data. I've got a lot of data. And data mining that customer data for insights is really, really important, because it gives us a unique perspective on the marketplace. And with that unique perspective, we can actually do things that help companies become more agile. Now, in terms of agility, the best example of agility that I had in my career was when we outsourced products to Flextronics. And over a weekend, nobody's going to believe this. I didn't even believe it at the time until I saw it. Flex set up 14 dedicated surface mount lines for Nortel over a weekend to get us out of a significant bottleneck on our optical networks products. Like, that is absolutely amazing performance. And that level of agility was so important for us to respond while I was Chief Procurement Officer. So I'm forever indebted to Flex. If I'd like to go back to some of the previous comments that Vincent made, as you're talking about the specific points and the specific data that people should have. In this environment, I really think it's important that people have information on country of origin. If you don't know where your product's coming from, you can't be agile. You're going to be roadblocked all the time. You're going to be bottlenecked all the time. That's number one. Secondly, Vincent touched on the metrics of inventory, quality, delivery. The most important metric that I've ever seen that says a company is going to fail I mean, if you really look at what we're worried about with all of the things that are happening with this uncertainty, it's really, can I get the supply? Am I going to be bottlenecked? Or is my supplier going to fail? Because a lot of companies are going to fail in this uncertain environment that we're in. So what are the best predictors for a company's failure? And it turns out that consistent quality delivery and on-time delivery are the best indicators of a company being in a good state. Because if they're not in a good state, if they're running out of money, they're going to cut corners, they're going to not be able to pay suppliers. So take a look at your delivery and your quality on incoming inspection. The second thing to look at is the stability of the management team. Has the board just removed the CEO? Is the board itself resigning? Like any indication in the executive management of a company that something dramatic is happening is a real indication that you need an alternate source. So, really focus on those things: on-time delivery, stability of the management team, and country of origin in order to succeed. Now, as far as the use of things like artificial intelligence, AI-driven analytics, I mean, really use data, make your decisions based on data. Liddica uses a lot of artificial intelligence, our analysis of supplier information and supplier data. And we're constantly refreshing our database. We're constantly adding new data types to the library. It grows at a tremendous rate, and we're doing things that would not be possible with the technologies that existed even 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay,
So
well,
vital that a company is staying on top and using the latest technologies in order to maintain their ability to be agile and focused.
guys, we have just
Bob,
a
if I
couple
could
of
just-
minutes. We
go
could
ahead.
have just a couple of minutes before we get into audience Q&A, but I just wanted to ask squeeze in one final question before we get to that, because I want to keep hammering on this idea of balancing priorities, because risk mitigation, as we know, comes at a cost. How can procurement teams strike this balance between mitigating risks and maintaining competitive pricing in a volatile market? Ken, just give me a minute or two on that, could you please?
Yeah, so it only comes at a cost if you haven't thought about it as you were designing your supply chain and your supply base. Because if you go in and say, look, in my market segment, these are my priorities, and there are really only 3 things that are priorities. One is your manufacturing costs, one is security of supply, and the other one is compliance to regulations. And if you're in the medical space, for example, compliance is really important. If you're in the military, getting your bullets when you need them is really important. If you're in, say, the PC business or the consumer electronics, cost becomes more important. So you've actually got to balance your supply chain around those 3 priorities. And of course, risk is part of security of supply. And so if you've actually done a good job of designing your supply base and putting in business processes that enable you to achieve your objectives, you should, in fact, be actually getting good results in risk mitigation as well as good results in cost. So the trade-off that most people deal with is that they've had their supply base designed by happenstance rather than by sitting down with a strategic purpose that says, what do I need to put in place to actually make my supply chain be effective? And if you're coming at it from a supply-based design that has not been set up to mitigate risk, then you'd better start looking at how you change your design, how you change the selection of suppliers, how you change the way you manage them in order to mitigate that. And of course, again, Liddica has insights and actually products that can help you in that regard. But it really comes down to, a good design delivers a good result. A poor design delivers a result that you have to keep working at to try and make it give you what you need.
Vincent, could you just give me a quick minute on how Flex approaches this question of risk mitigation versus competitive pricing?
I'll make an analogy with a song, Move to the Left. If move upstream, go early in the design of your supply chain, in the design of your products, in the decisions, at the point where, by the way, it's not too expensive to do it, you can influence. And as we know, we've all a procurement colleagues know that they became chief expediting officers in the last few years. You don't want that to be going on forever. You want to be the ones influencing the design early on. So move to the left upstream when the decisions can be made. Focus on standardization, focus on simplification. Make sure that, back to what Ken said, that you can rely on a data set that's as clean as possible. All those AI algorithms and so on are as good as your data. If your data is not good to start with, then you'll never go anywhere. So those are my simple messages. And on the risk versus cost balance, I would also say there's no perfect balancing on this one.
Sure.
Just agree with your internal and external stakeholders on what is the level of risk that we're collectively willing to take, and then take that as a given.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for that. I do want to open it up to the audience now. The audience has been submitting questions all along. We are going to get to as many of those as we can, time permitting, but even as we are answering them, please do continue to post your questions. And again, we'll get to as many as we can in the time remaining to us. So I'm just going to pitch these questions out, and whoever wants to jump in and grab them is happy to do so. This first one asks, what are the early warning signs that my supply chain strategy is not resilient enough for 2025? Ken, you want to start with that maybe?
I mean, it's the early warning sign is you're not getting what you need when you need it.
Yeah.
And you're not paying, you have to pay premiums in order to fill in holes and fill in gaps. So, I mean, measuring your performance against an industry standard so that you, first of all, know how you match what your peers are doing, particularly in your market segment, is important. But if you're not getting the right result, then there's something wrong with your engine, right? I mean, how do you know when your car's not working right? Well, you get a thump in the wheel, or you get a fire, it doesn't accelerate the way it used to. Measure your performance and see if you're getting what you need when you need it at the price you need it to be.
Can I add some color to that, Bob?
Please do, Vincent.
I would say, obviously, and Ken, you mentioned, if you see lead time, volatility in your lead time, that's an early sign. If you see volatility in your pricing, that means it's probably that you haven't set up the supply chain and the partnership in the right way. If you see quality supplier issues, that's another sign that somewhere resiliency is not going to be around the corner. If you have, as we mentioned earlier, on a high dependency on a lot of single source items, that's something you can analyze in advance. Don't wait till it's too late. If you don't have visibility through your supply chain, chances are you're not going to be able to anticipate and react and mitigate those risks. And I would say, last but not least, if you feel, and sometimes we all do, that you're managing a crisis as a permanent way of managing the company, then that's another sign that you probably are not very resilient.
Well, based on what the two of you have told us today about the need for designing resilience into a supply chain early, maybe those early warning signs are already too late if you haven't taken those steps. So that's really interesting. This question says, how do you recommend integrating sustainability into a procurement strategy without increasing costs significantly? This is a topic we haven't really touched on in this hour so far, and I'm really interested to hear your views on that. Vincent, you want to, from the Flex standpoint, how do you guys do it?
So that's a good question. I would say first you need to make sure that you define the framework at corporate level, not just in terms of procurement. What do you want to do in terms of ESG? What do you want to do in terms of environment, social activities? What is the message you're conveying internally and externally? Make sure that you've got all of that very well documented in a framework. That's the first thing. Second thing I would say from a corporate standpoint, make sure that you're setting ambitious targets, long-term targets, not just things to be done for the year. Integrate those targets in the way you measure suppliers and the way you onboard suppliers. Communicate on it so that it really becomes part of the way you deal with your suppliers. Something we've done, for instance, multiple times last year is, and maybe I don't use the right word, but do some webinars, do some educational sessions to make sure that all of your trading partners really understand what do you mean by sustainability and how you want to take it on board with your activities. And back to what we said multiple times already, partnership with your suppliers and your customers, for that matter, to make sure that everybody is on the same page.
Yeah. Ken, how do you work sustainability into your offering at Litica as a consideration that you might not have prioritized back in the day when you were actually in procurement?
Yeah, so I think again, it's part of the design issue. I mean, you have to be looking at mitigation. You have to be looking at a number of these things like sustainability that are necessary for a company to operate globally. I mean, for any company, large companies like Flex, and there's a number of them, they really have, chief officers of sustainability or environment or those kinds of titles. And they've done a really good job of trying to move their organizations to comply with the expectations of the market and some of the regulations that primarily come out of Europe, for example. So I think it has to be part of your design rules. It has to be as part of your specification as you're designing your supply chain. One of the problems that I see right now with all this uncertainty is that things like, global warming and climate change and sustainability, particularly in the US, seem to be getting thrown aside as not being very important. But any company, whether you're a domestic company or whether you're a global company, you really need to worry about it because, even if you're a small domestic company, eventually you're going to want to sell globally. And the Europeans, even the Chinese, are not going to want to buy your products if they don't have met the criteria that essentially is the stuff that's going to save the planet. And so it's got to be a high priority in your specification when you're designing your supply base and your supply chain.
Mhm.
But one of the things that's important is how do you actually get the data related to sustainability in a cost-efficient manner? I think that's one of the things at industry level that we still need to improve, because
Yep.
everyone is kind of asking to the next tier in their supply chain, hey, give me the greenhouse green gas emission of this specific resistor. But I'm asking that question to my supplier. All my peers are asking that question to the supplier. It's a very inefficient process overall. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
I fully agree with you, Ken. The level of, regardless of the politics, the level of requirements are going up, not down,
Yeah.
on a global scale.
Yeah.
We need to craft new solutions to better address those topics of sustainability in a way with more mutual solutions, things that we do at an industry level, not just bilateral two partners discussing with each other.
One of the things we're trying to do as a company is to gather more information on sustainability. A number of the component manufacturers are actually offering what they, calling green components, where they have, the right kind of terminations, they, anti-sulfur, anti-halogen, that kind of thing. We're collecting that kind of information in our database so we can make recommendations to customers of, how green is their bill of materials, those kinds of things. We're also tracking what different companies are doing themselves and what they've published for, zero emission targets and that kind of thing. And as well, we're collecting data on things like what associations or memberships do they have in various organizations that are actually the organizations that are leading the charge on sustainability and these other things. So that kind of information will be made available later this year to our customers. But we have a lot of that background data available now. But it is something, anytime something new comes out, you need more information, you need more data. And so you really need to be tied into sources of information and, places where you can get, true, good, verified information so that you can actually be making the right choices. And
Yeah.
hopefully Litica is one of the sources that people will come to, but we're not the only ones out there that are trying to get this kind of information in front of our customers in the industry at large.
But
Right.
no one
Okay.
should underestimate the complexity of it, because as we said before, we need to get, for instance, COO at component level. Well, there could be multiple factories for a given component,
Right.
on your tier one, but also on your sub tiers. Therefore, the sustainability data can be also very different depending on the COO. So all of a sudden, you don't have one static set of data. You've got a whole spectrum to
Right.
take into account. So it is a
Okay.
complex topic. Yeah.
Yeah,
Time
wait,
is running out, guys.
even if you can.
Consider this last question kind of a lightning round requiring a very short answer because we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon. But I want to ask you very quickly because we have been talking kind of tangentially about this whole notion of supplier collaboration, whether it's through webinars, face-to-face, whatever. How do you see the role of supplier collaboration evolving in 2025? Ken?
How do I see the supplier collaboration evolving in 2025? Well, I think it's up to you as a company to make sure that you're working with the right companies and you're working with them in a way that you're working for mutual benefit. And put your energy into those companies that are most valuable in terms of your supply chain. And make sure you have open, honest communication with them and find ways of working together so that the value add is not only going in one direction, but it's being shared with the supply base.
Okay. Your perspective, Vincent?
I will
Real
add,
quick.
this is very close to my heart, but I'll try to make it short. Make sure
Okay.
that you have clear communication with your suppliers, backward looking, forward looking, be very transparent. That's the first thing. Make sure that you're very honest. Integrity is still the #1 value in my mind when you deal with suppliers or when you deal with anybody else. So build that trust by being honest to start with. Make sure that you're very consistent in your actions. Don't just go up and down all the time. Always be very collaborative. Be fair in your negotiations. You don't necessarily want to always get the lowest unit price. You want to get the best value out of that partnership. And make sure that you have a closed loop process so that you can give feedback to your suppliers. Otherwise, it's just nice wishful thinking activity. So that's to me, those are the mantras that you need to have in mind for this.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Boy, I just hate to cut you off here because it's such a fascinating and timely topic, but we are just about out of time. I have one final question to pose here. I'm going to pose it to both of you, starting with Vincent. How can I start transforming my procurement strategy today to stay ahead of supply chain disruptions?
So you definitely, the theme of this webinar was to really adapt or be left behind. So you need to start right away. And regardless if you're a large company or a small one, if you have big budget or not, here's the few things I would share from based on my own experience. We talked about it. Make sure you leverage your analytics. Very, very important. Make sure you've got good data and you leverage your analytics. Diversify your supply chain. Regardless of how you want to call it, localization, nearshoring, diversify your supply chain. Strengthen the supplier relationships. We just talked about collaboration a minute ago. Have something to really monitor the risk that is embedded in your supply chain. You don't fix what you don't measure, so be very careful on that one. And last but not least, also close to my heart, make sure that all those sustainability ESG goals are really embedded in the framework, in the strategy that you deploy.
Ken, close us out with your perspective on this question.
Well, I'll take my lead from professional baseball. And in the spring, it doesn't matter whether you're the biggest star on the team or the lowliest rookie. You always go back to basics at spring training. And I think that's what everyone needs to do here is go back to basics and examine your supply base, examine your supply chain. Take a look for vulnerabilities. Look at why you're dealing with the suppliers you're looking at. Actually go through a due diligence exercise on all of them to make sure they're solid, because if your foundation isn't solid, then your results are at risk. And so from that, get your foundation right, and then take advantage of some of the insights that have come out of this webinar and apply them, because you need to have strong relationships with your manufacturers, with your suppliers, and it needs to be open, honest communication to get you through the volatile times we're facing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. What great insights you guys have shared with us in the last hour for an extremely timely topic. I mean, the interest of this audience just shows how important it is to talk about this issue right now and some of the solutions out there in a time of extreme uncertainty and a very harsh spotlight being trained on procurement today. So thank you, both of you, for that. And audience, thank you also for your participation, your great questions. We didn't get to all your questions. I apologize for that, but I'm sure our speakers would be only too happy to address them offline. In the meantime, here's a chance to get your free guide. Learn how to adapt your electronic supply chain, or as we say, risk being left behind. Take a shot of that QR code right now, or if you don't have time to do it, don't worry about it. This will be sent to all webinar attendees at the conclusion of this webinar, which unfortunately I have to say is right now. Thanks again, Vincent Collard and Ken Bradley. And audience, thank you very much. Everybody, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.